Today, we're going to give you guys an in-depth look at the other side of the NFL draft process. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, we are throwing a little bit of a curveball in today's episode. Obviously, I'm Zach Hicks, as always, your co-host of this episode of this show. Jake Arthur is down in Tennessee at the Tennessee Pro Day watching Hendon Hooker, Hyatt, and all those other guys. And we wanted to kind of, pull it back a little bit. My good friend Nathan Shackelford here, he's an agent with Higher Calling Sports. And we kind of want to talk about part of the draft process. Now, you guys know that we talk about it from the front office standpoint, from the Colts standpoint a lot, how you go through the draft process, what the Colts are looking for, and stuff like that. But one thing I think the average fan doesn't really understand is how just hectic and how much of the process is like based on measurables, profiles, all that kind of stuff here. So Nathan here is going to give us a little bit of shine here into some of the draft process from the agency and the player side. And if you guys don't know, one player that he does rep is Trevor Denbo, Colts guy who made the 53-man roster last year, did get a couple games up on the roster last year too. So he'll be able to give us a little bit of insight there. So Nathan, before we get into this conversation, man, how's this process going for you, and how hectic's it been so far?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for having me. You'll see the Texas Rangers logo on my chest. It's opening day, so Rangers should be decent this year. So I'm excited for that. But it's been good. I'd say really the busiest time for an agent is just between January and April. It's a busy time, and I have my last pro day today. Got a guy at TCU that should be going right now, and after that, it's the period that I call hurry up and wait, which is you just sit around for a month and let teams make all their reviews and processes and all that, and they come back to you. So it's kind of that we're about to get to that waiting period where we'll kind of figure out a little more as it comes.
Yeah, for sure. We're kind of in that a little bit right now. That we call it the lull in the off season. Like the lull in the busy season is what we're in right now.
Yeah.
So getting to the process here, we won't go too much into detail on how you recruit guys and all that stuff. I know it's kind of changed a little bit over the years and stuff like that, but you recruit your guys, you get your guys signed on. What's your conversation like before the Hula Bowls and the CGS All-Star game? And how do you kind of determine where these guys are going? Is it based off of what teams are telling you, or kind of how does that whole process work at the beginning?
Yeah. So what I tell the guys is that it's a three-step process, really. Your first step is your film, whatever you put out in college. At the end of the day, scouts are always going to go back to your film. So if you had a really good tape, that's going to count for something. It's not like it's just going to get thrown in the trash. Your second part is your all-star game. So like you're saying, hula, gridiron, NFLPA, East-West, senior. That's going to compose a big part of the grade. And then the last component of the grade is pro days. To give you an example, there can be guys that are really under the radar that had really good film, maybe at a smaller school, that then blow up one of the other two or both of those last two components and go from being someone that no one knows about to being a guy that everyone wants. So my example for that this year would be Levi Bell. Levi Bell was one of the top guys ranked on, I think he was, for a long time this season, he was the number one ranked PFF defensive lineman in the country. No one knew about him, though. Goes into his all-star game at gridiron. He's going to switch to fullback upon recommendations of scouts. Every single rep when he was in fullback, either guy was on the ground or 10 yards off the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
And every team that was there, including the Colts, came up to me and said, "Where the heck has this guy been?" And then he goes to his pro day, and at 260 pounds, he does 33 reps on the bench press, 37.5-inch vert, and then runs a 4.58. And so suddenly you have a guy that goes from who is this guy to now teams are talking about he could get drafted because that's crazy explosive for a fullback. So just shows you the process is so multifaceted and each part of it really matters, and each part of it's really important to take seriously.
Yeah, for sure. So getting these guys to those all-star games, though, is that something where you as an agent, you're say you have an offer from Hula and CGS for the same guy, you're just evaluating where to send your guy best, or is there something where scouts are saying like, hey, we'd rather see you at this bowl? Like, how do you determine where to send your boys when you get those invites?
Yeah, there's typically a pretty regular pecking order, which is going to be senior, followed by, this one can get dicey, either Shrine or NFLPA. I think Shrine this year is over. It was over PA. Then PA, and then Hula has actually jumped Gridiron. Gridiron used to be above Hula, but Hula's leaped Gridiron, and then Tropical, and then everything else you have from there. So we had a guy that was at Gridiron. He got an invite for Hula, and I said, hey, you got to take Hula. We had a guy that got an NFLPA, and that was his highest one. So we said, hey, let's just stick with PA. So it's kind of just on really what they get invited to. Agents can try to get guys into those, but really, especially your top 3 games, they kind of pick who they want. Some of those games like Gridiron and Hula, you might be able to say, hey, let's try to get this guy in, and you might be able to pull some things, but those bigger games are just taking who they want.
Yeah, for sure. And so say your guy has great film, like you said, like Levi is a great example, great film. You go to CGS, has a good CGS there. Now we're getting to the pro day process. And I know, obviously it's not the end of the world when these guys don't get that combine invite. They're doing their pro days. Surely people sitting at home always say, pro day numbers are inflated and stuff like that. We can't think of them too serious, but how big are these like pro day numbers when it comes to teams evaluating these players?
Yeah, the funny thing is I'd actually say it's flipped. I'd say combine numbers are inflated, especially the ones that you get, because they're going off of laser a lot of times. And laser is about a tenth of a second faster than hand is what we found traditionally. So my guys train on laser, and then we tell them at pro day, expect a 0.1 on everything you do. And we found it to be pretty accurate. So generally the pro day numbers you're seeing, those are what scouts are just doing on their hand. And even at combine, when you see those numbers, a lot of times scouts aren't taking those numbers, they're taking their hand numbers because they don't trust lasers. They just trust their hand. It's a huge part of the process because really you have, it's going to sound really, at the point of sounding extremely obvious, there's 3 things that can happen to you at a pro day. You can go up, you can go down, you can stay the same. And so if you were a guy that someone liked going into their pro day, and you have an average day and you stay the same, you're still in that same spot. You go in, you have a better day, maybe you move up a little bit on their pecking order. Or if you're a fringe guy, especially if you're on that fringe of mini camp or low free agent signing, if you go and you have a bad pro day, you can fall off the board completely. So it's big. It shouldn't be as important, I think. I think with the evolution of game speed, especially the technology we have there's no reason we shouldn't just be measuring game speed instead of 40. Training guys for a 40 that they're never, unless you're a receiver running a go or you're on kickoff, you're never going to run straight down 40 yards. So there's a lot better ways to measure game speed, in my opinion. But that's still how scouts kind of look at things. So it can be important. It's very rare that it's going to take a guy that was completely off the board to being a drafted guy. You kind of can move up a little bit in ranks or go down a little bit in ranks, but it's not like if you were a first round draft pick and you have an awful pro day, suddenly you're a mini camp guy, or, a mini camp guy and you have an amazing day, you're a 3rd round pick. That's not how it works. It can move you up and down a little bit, but it can be the difference of thousands of dollars for the guys.
Yeah, for sure. And the last thing I'll ask you before we jump to our next segment, we're talking more about the draft day itself and all those things like mini camps and all that is, I've heard in the past, this is a story that I heard about a scout really liked a player and he told the player, like, you have to hit this minimum vertical jump for our team to draft you. you have to hit this or we will not draft you. If you do hit this, though, we will draft you. Or it was like something like that. And I won't say too much about the scout involved, but it's someone who works with the Colts now. So there's a little tie back to the Colts. How common is that kind of in this practice where you have scouts or you have NFS people, whoever with teams saying like, hey, we like your guy a lot, but you got to get him to this number for us to take him?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, it's generally going to be saying a specific hard line number is going to be tough. I mean, if you say you have to run a 4.58,
yeah,
it's generally not going to be that. It's generally going to be something like, hey, if he's in the 4.5s, he's great. Or hey, if he's jumping around 34, around 36. So they'll give you some benchmarks. But like it's not going to be a set, okay, I need you to bench 30, I need you to hit 32 on bench, and that's the difference maker. It's going to be a range, and depends on what scouts are kind of looking for, what people are looking for. Because a lot of times scouts go in with kind of favorites of who they like, and the pro day lets them pitch those guys harder. So there was a guy that the Colts really liked of mine. He didn't quite have the pro day he wanted. So now it's going to be harder for that scout to go to his guy and say, hey, we need to sign this guy, because he didn't have the pro day that he was wanting him to have. So pro days can be leverage for scouts to go to their higher ups and say, hey, he hit this number, so let's get him in. So a lot of times when they're saying that, they're saying that's the ammunition I need to be able to make this pitch, because there's a lot of stuff in the background you don't see going on.
Definitely. So coming up, we're going to talk about the hectic day that is draft day and everything that comes right after it. But first, the Built March Madness bracket is here. We know you guys have a favorite bar or puff, and now's your favorite time to make it count. Go to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. You know, I'll be voting for Cookie Dough Puff. And if you want the Colts to draft a quarterback at 4, then you'll be voting for it too. That's just the rules. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will get a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. What makes Built bars and puffs so good? Well, for starters, they're all high in protein, low in sugar, and covered in 100% real chocolate. Run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now and vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. All right, Nathan, so before we get right into like what is draft day itself, when we were actually talking about doing this episode beforehand, you were saying that the way that teams grade players isn't so much like how we do it in the media. You know, we'll slap on first round grade, slap on second round grade, slap on high second, high third, you know, all that stuff. But for you, from your experience, it's mostly more like draftable priority free agent, mini camp guy. Like, how do they kind of separate on their boards from your understanding?
Yeah. I mean, it can go as broad as you want or as deep as you want. So there's, from a broad perspective, for guys draftable, for the kind of the broadest terms, you're going to say front board draftable, back board draftable, and then free agent, minicamp. I mean, those are kind of going to be your biggest terms. But really how it gets broken down is you kind of have grades. Your first, second round guys, first 3 rounds, I mean, decently set in stone. I mean, if you have a first, second, third round grade, where it gets dicey is kind of 5th round and on. You'll kind of hear different terms there of what that means. And a lot of times with draft grades, once you start getting to that 4th, 5th round, you have, especially if it's 5th to 7th, I mean, you might as well take that as a 50-50 shot the guy gets drafted. When you hear that, it's not, oh, he's going in the 5th. It's, oh, I like him enough that I could justify drafting him in the 5th, but that doesn't mean I need to draft him at all. So you're going to have these different things where, you know, what I tell my guys is if a team says to me, hey, so for example, I was talking to a team and they said, we have a 7th to PFA on him. And what I tell a guy is that means that most likely you're not getting drafted. But when they go to their team and say, hey, we should take this guy, the argument's going to be, well, we had a draftable grade on him. So let's just sign him now. So when they're putting that 7th to PFA on you, or that 5th to 7th, a lot of times they're using it as leverage to be able to go back in and say, hey, we had a draft grade on this guy. We just weren't able to draft him. So now we're going to take him. So generally when you hear those late round, I mean, your first 3 rounds, I mean, those are pretty set. Maybe in order of where they go or how they're fighting for what spot. I mean, maybe that changes. But from that lower level, from day 3 on, it gets pretty dicey. And it can be the difference of, a team has a 5th round grade on your guy, and it gets to the 6th round and they go, oh, we had a 4th round grade on this guy at the same position. Now we don't need your guy anymore.
Right.
So then that kind of falls to the back end of the draft, where you have guys that are considered, kind of the categories from there are PFA, priority free agent, which is kind of your low level signing guys, and minicamp guys. Generally what I consider, you'll hear the term PFA thrown out a ton. And I think it really, really what it means, it's used too broadly. I think it kind of almost, a lot of people use it as just anyone that signed after the draft. Really, to me, when you're talking PFA, you're saying this is a team that at least 3, 4, 5 teams really want, and there's a bidding war that's going on.
Right.
So we started off at 2,000 and we're signing for 10,000. Generally, a PFA is going to be signing for at least 5,000, if not 10,
right,
for a signing bonus. And so it's something where you have a lot of competition. So a guy like Levi, if Levi's not drafted, Levi will be a priority free agent, where
right,
we'll have teams lining up to call. We'll go through it that way. Then you kind of have these guys that are, regular free agents, which is, hey, we've got $1,000 left, or we've got $2,000. Can we get your guy in the door? At least have a contract going in. And then you've got your minicamp guys who are literally just hoping they can impress someone and get a contract. I mean, it's an uphill battle, but at least they get a shot.
Yeah. So last year, let's look a little bit at Trevor Denbo's from last year. This is a guy last season. I'm sure on draft day there was a chance that he could have got drafted. Because he had a great offseason, great pro day numbers. I mean, his pro day numbers were outstanding. I was looking at them the other day. It was like 4.4 flat, like 38-inch vertical, like real good numbers. He did the special teams in college. He did some punting in college too. Like he did it all in college there. So this was a guy where there was a chance he could get drafted there on day 3. What was it like for you, like the turn of round 4 into round 5? You have a guy like Trevor Denbo who could get drafted, but teams are already calling with the UDFA or with the PFA offers and stuff like that. Walk us through that process right there when you get into round 5 and you have a guy like Trevor Denbo.
Yeah, I'd say, Denbo is going to be one of those PFA categories where we had a really good pro day. We knew teams were going to be calling. The Colts were actually one of the first ones to start calling, because they straight up said, hey, look, we're just not going to, we just don't. I mean, I think really that they knew they didn't have to draft him because they weren't worried anyone else was going to draft him, which somehow is how PFAs become draft picks. Is 10 teams are negotiating and they go, forget this. I'm not going to a $20,000 signing bonus. I'm just going to draft you.
Exactly. Exactly.
They just pull the cord. So, but I think for the Colts, they knew that there wasn't a team that was really going to draft him like that. And so really towards that end of the draft is when we start communicating of, hey, if he's not drafted, we want him here. What does that look like? The first number is always laughably low.
Always.
And then, like it was, I mean, you're just like, I'm not even getting, I mean, that does nothing for me. And then you just there's different strategies to do, but I just like to field offers, take my time, let things happen. And then as teams get more nervous, they'll call you back and they'll almost bet against themselves and just keep upping the price because they start getting worried. This actually happened. One really good example of this was a few years ago when I had a kicker, Chris Nagar. We had a 4-team bidding battle that started. The Colts were one of them. And I remember the Colts, like everyone was calling from the Colts, from the scout to the special teams coordinator to the GM, saying like, we want to get him here. We want to do it. But he had it made up in his mind. He wanted to go to the Jets. That's just where he felt like the best opportunity was. But, you just see different people calling, and it depends kind of how much leverage a guy has on who needs to call, who needs to be involved in that. And then the bid just kind of starts going up for a guy like that, for a guy that, has some interest. And for us with Trevor, though, I mean, we from pretty early on in the process, we knew that Trevor's ideal spot was the Colts. And so we wanted to get him a fair deal, but just get him in there. We didn't want to play too many games where we really made the Colts angry or did something and then worried about it. So we just wanted to get him a good deal and then get him where he wanted to go. So that's kind of what we did with Trevor.
Yeah, yeah. So shifting to Levi, this is one of your top guys this year. He's he's a fullback. Obviously, it's not a guy who is going to go round 2 or 3 or anything like that. But it is a guy that some teams have that draftable grade on and stuff. Like, when do you expect that bidding war to start with you for a guy like Levi? Does it start like round 5, round 6, or when do you think that's going to start with him?
I mean, it'll depend how many teams are interested and how teams do things. There's some teams that will start almost kind of throwing offers on day 2. I mean, just to kind of put something out there. Real intense bidding, though, generally starts for a guy like that probably around the 5th, 6th. And then it wouldn't surprise me if we had a deal done before the draft was done. Just having that locked up. And that when any team calls, they say we want him, we say, hey, well, we've got a deal in place. We're ready to go. If you want him, I mean, you can draft him. But yeah, so that's, I'd expect, 4th is pretty early, generally around 5th, 6th. It's kind of when stuff picks up.
Yeah, 4th round is when it's like that back end of the draft board. Typically, I know that for instance, in the past, guys like Grover Stewart, Kari Willis for the Colts, they moved up to draft those guys in the 4th. But 5, 6, 7, it's like early undrafted free agency. It's kind of what I always say to people is that's when you're taking your chances on you're going to give these guys a lot more than you give an undrafted free agent. So you have to be sure that you want to take them there. But these can be guys that you have the PFA grades on that you're taking around 5 or 6 because you heard, just throw out a Colts player like Isaiah Rodgers, for instance, they took a couple years ago, big special teams guy. You could have heard that he's getting offers in the 100,000 or 200,000 or something like something crazy. So you're like, well, that's what it takes to draft him. Let's just draft him now, So that's kind of how that day 3 goes from everything I've heard from other agents and from you.
Yeah, it's really you're looking for traits in those last few rounds. You're looking for developmental. What I tell my guys is, hey, if you're 5th on, your mindset should be, I'm not coming in as a safety. I'm coming in as a special teamer.
Yes.
That can play safety. I think honestly this year, I think that's going to flip a little bit with safety depth. But when you come in the door, your first year, you're not going to most likely see the field for your position. You're going to see it for special teams. And so they're looking for traits of guys who can, when they're saying, okay, well, why does it matter how fast the guy's 40 was that we're drafting in the 7th round? Well, we're going to put him on team. So how fast can he get downfield? How fast can he get down on coverage? So you'll see a lot of teams take kind of guys that have some freak out, like they did something crazy in testing. They have really long arms, some kind of trait that they really feel like is going to be hard to find in that priority free agency or free agency period, with some traits that make that guy a little bit different of a category than your typical PFAs would be.
Yeah. Last thing I'll ask you here, and then we'll close it out here, and it kind of just reiterates what you just said there is, whenever we see people doing these mock drafts and stuff and all these kind of mock seasons and all that, people are like, oh, why did they take another running back there in round 6 or round 7? Or why are they taking a wide receiver? They already have like 6 on the roster. Why are they taking them? But from everything you just said, right, it's all about special teams when you get to day 3, right? That is the most important thing. Trevor is a great example, but I'm sure a lot of guys you've worked with, like, it is all special teams on day 3.
Yeah. Day 3 is a big, really the only position you won't see on special teams running down is going to be offensive linemen. Even some defensive linemen you'll have if they can run fast enough. So, and quarterback obviously, but Colts use running backs in special teams, linebackers pretty heavy, DBs, some receivers. So really just about anyone can be a teams guy. So when you know those last rounds, you're looking for guys that can help you a little bit there because you don't want your starters on special teams. Generally, you generally want other guys, and so you're just kind of taking cheap labor and throwing them out there.
Yeah.
So just kind of taking what you can get, and but those guys don't have if you're a 6th, 7th round pick, you don't have a ton of security. A good PFA comes in and does really well, and 6th, 7th doesn't mean you're locked to make the team. If you're a PFA or a free agent, you're kind of this equal playing field. You still have a contract coming in the door. So if you surprise people, you're not going to suddenly, we knew Trevor wasn't going to go in and suddenly, beat out a Nick Cross from day 1. When you draft a guy that high, you're investing in him pretty intentionally. But, if with other free agents, you're on equal footing and you have the chance to kind of make that spot if you can kind of carve out a role, especially on special teams.
Surely. We saw last year with the Colts, they took a guy in Curtis Brooks in, I think, round 5 or round 6, and he ended up not making the roster. But guys who did make the roster, Trevor Denbo made the initial 53, Dallas Flowers, undrafted free agent, made the initial 53. All about those special teams, and those were 2 special teams guys that were stars from day one.
Yeah.
And they were able to get in there. So last thing I'll ask you, and then we'll close it out here. I promise this is actually the last one. Who we watching of your guys here for the Colts though? Like, just throw out some names. You don't have to say how much the Colts like them. Just give the people some names here about who to watch.
I love Levi. Levi's not a fit probably in Indy because he's a fullback really. So I mean, you could play him at D-line. I just don't know. I've got a couple of line. I've got a D tackle at TCU. There, Terrell Cooper. I've got a outside linebacker, edge hybrid, Nelson Mavanosor from Texas Tech, or Texas Tech transferred to Texas State. Those 2 guys, and then we've talked about Lemmy before, Lemmy Young. So those are kind of the guys that I think are kind of around. They're somewhere.
Yeah. We'll keep it on though. Just wink, hint, wink, wink there. Yeah. So I appreciate you jumping on today, Nathan, and talking about the whole draft process. Because again, I do think there are some misconceptions about how the process plays out, the importance of pro days, the importance of day 3, and what day 3 guys are. So I appreciate you illuminating that for us, and make sure you guys are following him there on social media at Shack19. His agency is also Higher Calling Sports. You guys can find all their stuff there on social medias. And then for us, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. Also subscribe to Locked On Colts podcast on YouTube. And thank you for making Locked On Colts your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes. From free agency to draft to salary cap management and more, join NFL experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise every Monday through Friday. Find Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'll see you guys tomorrow. If my mouse works. Here we go. Now we'll see you guys tomorrow.